first of all, congratulations on your PhD. When I was in college, I was originally just kind of planning like, all right, I was studying literature and classical studies, and I was like, all right, let me plan my courses around the possibility of a literature PhD. And although originally I started with that intention, I sort of like looked around at my professors. Now, granted, it's a little bit of an exceptional case since I grew up in New York City, and the city schools are just kind of staffed over 50% with adjunct professors. And the way it works in New York City is you get paid essentially per course. And you could easily end up in a situation where you're functionally working like a 60-hour a week job in terms of course load, grading, teaching, all of that, and still, come out with something like at the time, like a $30,000, $40,000 a year salary, basically making much less than the value that you're giving to the universities. And I was like, well, I have to be realistic here. As smart or good of a writer as I think I am, or blah blah. The fact is, this clearly is not a meritocracy in the real like sense of the word. Everybody around me, who some of these people are great professors, and some of them have done big research, and yet here they are. They're like in their 50s and 60s, and they're really struggling hard. Maybe you could also talk about like this elite culture of the resentment between the not just like the rump professionals and the fallen professionals, but the kind of resentments between working class people and the professional class. Because I mean, like I live in a working class neighborhood, and it's crazy when I talk to people. They have like an inborn conservatism that is based on just like a hard knock life. But when you talk about politics, it's like they really don't care that much about, either Democrats or Republicans. I mean, some do, but generally speaking, everybody that I speak to around me, they're very kind of suspicious. And it's very different, if I talk to, my more educated friends or like whatnot. Maybe we could talk about how these kinds of resentments emerge and how they're being used to kind of like essentially fuel a culture war that stands as an excuse to not actually, pass necessary legislation to resolve this unsolvable problem.
Yeah. So most of the media that gets produced, the political content, the books, the shows, all of it, most of it is produced by rump professionals, people who are successful enough economically that they are able to derive a living, and a good living, from talking and writing. And these people then work for oligarchs, corporations, universities, large entities, think tanks. Some of them directly get large amounts of money from particular rich people who just really like their work. Overwhelmingly, if you're following the news or you're following the media, you're getting your content delivered to you by these rump professionals who are embedded in the system, who are able to have their jobs because of the degree to which they align with the values of their employers. And they've convinced themselves that they are there on merit when, to a large degree, they're there because they say things that the people who give out the grant money like to hear. If you're applying for an academic job, one of the things that they care about is, do you bring in grant money? Well, what does that mean? It means, how good is your relationship with rich people and their organizations? Can you convince rich people and their organizations to give you money? Is your work close enough to their perspective or their interests that they'll give you a bunch of cash? We as a university want their cash because we don't get enough money from the state because the state can't raise enough tax revenue to fund us. So we're looking for students to give us money with giant tuition fees, and we're looking for outside money to come in from grant organizations. So how good are you at supplying that exactly? The star is the one who can bring in the most money. That's what makes a star academic a star academic. It has nothing to do with merit or how good the work is or how smart anybody is, or how hard anybody works, frankly. So there is, I think, an enormous frustration on the part of traditional workers that none of the political content is really for them. None of it really echoes their interests. The fallen professionals are more likely to think that this content that the rump professionals are making is for them. They want to believe that they're educated and they're smarter than the workers. So they, of course, read the good sources. They follow the people who are smart, the experts, the scientists, the people who go to the good universities. Indeed, if you're a professional, you went to college. So on some level, you thought you'd get something out of it. You thought these people had something positive to teach you. So there tends to be more belief among the fallen professionals in the elites and in the rump professionals that the elites employ. And indeed, a lot of the rump professionals will kind of allow you to pat yourself on the head if you watch their stuff or you read their stuff. They'll go, come on, we're the people who are in the know. And those other people, they read the fake news and they're getting deceived by the Russians and they don't know what's going on. We know what's going on, and you know because you follow along with what I am making. So I think that what that does is it makes it very, very difficult for the ordinary working class person to follow politics in a way that's constructive, because if they are consuming the establishment media, they're getting perspectives that are totally uninterested in helping them out. If they try to come up with their own theories and their own frameworks for understanding what's going on, it's very difficult for them because they're not in the kinds of organizations that would produce a surplus within the working class that would allow for someone who was working class to also be a writer. If you think back to the 50s and 60s and 70s, these unions had little newsletters and bulletins and pamphlets, and there were some number of people that were in the union who would write up about what was going on and try to help the ordinary person think about what was going on. There were newspapers back in the day that were for the workers, that were written by workers. None of that exists anymore. So now when the working class person tries to understand politics, it's from a kind of self-taught autodidact position. And the autodidact is very easy to take advantage of because the autodidact hasn't been told what to read and struggles, therefore, to distinguish what's worth reading from what's not worth reading, and can easily get derailed and sucked into various kinds of holes and pits, right? Now, demonizing the person who falls into these holes and traps is a very effective way of keeping the fallen professionals reading only the establishment sources and paying attention only to the things that they're supposed to pay attention to. At the same time, it is the case that the self-taught autodidact who isn't in a labor union, who doesn't read pamphlets, doesn't read old-fashioned lefty newspapers, doesn't have a whole lot to work with, and does tend to make mistakes. So what tends to happen is that the worker will develop a kind of hostile anti-elite attitude that can get sucked up into things like anti-Semitism, right? And the professional will develop a hostile attitude to the far right and therefore to workers who pay attention, because workers who pay attention tend to fall down these right-wing rabbit holes. So this means that you don't really have much of a functioning left within the traditional working class. The left becomes largely a fallen professional phenomenon. And the right becomes something that feeds off of the degree to which the ordinary worker is atomized and an autodidact and not sure where to go or what to do. So there's an exploitation of the atomization of the traditional worker and also an exploitation of the feelings of precarity felt by the fallen professional. And so on every cultural issue under the sun, they get polarized against each other. And so then anytime you start to see any collaboration on things like Medicare for all or tuition-free college or a job guarantee or infrastructure spending or anything that would really involve a sizable collaboration, what will happen is that there will be a deliberate effort to introduce cultural issues onto the political agenda that will create antagonism. And we're seeing, for instance, in France, they were having a big struggle against Macron over pensions. Now the police have shot someone who comes from a minority ethnic background. So now there's a whole argument about police violence and race and immigration, and it's dissecting the movement and breaking it up into its component parts and pitting the more educated left-leaning part against the less educated right-leaning part. And when I say conspiracy theory in the book, what I'm really talking about are these theories that working class people get that are based on an autodidact point of view that ascribe a lot of agency or intentionality to particular individuals or groups, and which tend to downplay or ignore systematic effects. So things like capital mobility as an incentive environment that gradually drags everybody, whether they want to be dragged or not, in a particular direction. Those things get downplayed in conspiracy theories in favor of theories which place blame on a specific group of individuals who have a plot or a specific group, ethnicity, race, religion, that is fundamentally viewed as bad or untrustworthy.